Hello, and welcome back to Adam's Fam Anime. I am John, and today we are going to be reviewing Dragon Ball Super Chapter 76, titled The Fate of the Saiyans. Now, I suppose I should be saying this with just about every chapter review that I do, but obviously, spoilers ahead. So if you haven't read it yet, please go do so, and if you don't care about reading it first, then here we go. So this chapter picks up exactly where we left off in the last chapter, where Vegeta is getting the mess beat out of him by Granola, who has activated his second eye. And Granola manages to have Vegeta on the ropes for the most part just by using Ki Blast, at least for the first couple pages. And this beatdown goes on long enough to knock Vegeta out of his new form, which I suppose we're calling Ultra Ego for the time being. And there's even a little nod to the chapter title where Vegeta and Granola speak about fate. Granola in particular seems that the universe is deeming the fate for the Saiyans, where Vegeta grabs his leg and demands that he is the master of his own fate, to which Granola responds by beating the mess out of Vegeta while he's laying on the ground defenseless. And just before the final blow could be thrown, to no one's surprise, Captain Save-A-Bro, aka Goku, shows up to break up the fight. And he does this by using a really heavy punch to create some space between Granola and Vegeta. And naturally, Vegeta responds in a way that every Dragon Ball fan could have expected, and that would be by attacking Goku for breaking up his fight. And he actually even lands a couple attacks on Goku while giving him a mini lecture. And I suppose the most relevant thing on these few pages, at least between Goku and Vegeta, is the fact that Vegeta says the only reason that he did fight side by side with Goku was because they had something that they both were protecting, even going as far as to say that he'd rather die than team up with Goku. So as he says this, he spits some blood out, and as he's doing that, Granola tries to sneak in a critical attack targeting one of Vegeta's vital points. Well, Goku sees this and then knocks Vegeta out the way, which conveniently renders Vegeta unconscious. And after Vegeta's unconscious, Granola takes notice that Goku timed that properly. And when he asks about it, we get to see that Goku is flexing a little bit when it comes to his brain power now. And shortly after, Goku even proves his point. He allows Granola to sneak in an attack from behind, and Goku drops to base form to allow Granola to believe that he was knocked out. And Granola seems to be adamant about finishing off Vegeta first, so as he's walking away from Goku's seemingly unconscious body, Goku gets off an attack on Granola's back that's uncontested. And then to really sell his point, when Granola goes in for another vital attack, this time on Goku's abdomen area, Goku catches the attack and then counters with a strong punch of his own. Now, Goku reveals to Granola that he noticed that in between locking onto a target and actually attacking, there's a small window of time that it can be used to shift your vitals or to counter in some way, shape, or form. But Granola responds by noting that Goku's attacks are actually dampened by using that defensive ability. It's kind of a similar vein to the Kefla fight, where Goku could defend himself perfectly, but was having trouble shifting his mind or his power into attack mode. In any case, they continue to fight some more, and Vegeta wakes up right as the fight starts to wind down, as Goku's landing some attacks, but Granola ultimately is getting the upper hand. He even manages to knock Goku back to his base form as well. And after this, Vegeta steps back up to the plate, but this time using a little bit of humility and requesting to fight Granola one-on-one. And when he does say please, Goku says fine. So from that point, Vegeta flies up to meet Granola at the point where he knocked Goku to the ground. And it's there that we get some uncharacteristic dialogue from Vegeta, where it almost comes across as fatherly advice about Granola and his desire for revenge. Now, it does appear that Granola seems to be listening a little bit more to what Vegeta has to say. However, Vegeta doesn't give him too much time to ponder on what was said as he transforms into his Ultra Ego form again. And as he does, he points out again that his power is boundless, at least in that form. And I'm still interested to see exactly what that means and how that's possible when he was just knocked out of his form a few pages back. In any case, Vegeta surprises a weakened Granola with a Ki Blast, which creates some smoke around him. And then in that confusion, he manages to get off a pretty mean headbutt to Granola, and that headbutt sends Granola flying toward the city, and he lands on top of its protective dome. However, despite his attempts to stay out of the city, Vegeta immediately follows up with a kick that sends him down into the dome. And after a short protest from Granola to move the fight elsewhere, Vegeta ignores him, and then they begin to have an exchange right there in the city. And as they're fighting, even though Granola seems exhausted, it's pretty clear that he's got the upper hand. Vegeta is taking hits while Granola is blocking them, even though he seems to be a bit stressed by the attacks. I mean, Vegeta even goes as far as to take a page out of Goku's book, and he bites his opponent. Now, this prompts Granola to slam him into the ground, and we get a little bit of taunting from Vegeta. And considering that he's on the losing end of most of this fight, it kind of comes across more as cheeky than, the Vegeta in the past, where it comes across as arrogant. And it actually kind of makes me wonder if whether or not this transformation will come along with a different kind of personality when it comes to Vegeta. But I suppose we'll have to wait until the anime touches base with this new form, since this fight in particular has been so back and forth in terms of fighting and dialogue. Anyway, I suppose we'll get back to the fight at hand. So we see that after he's been slammed on the ground, that Vegeta is taunting Granola, and Granola responds by standing directly over him and then launching off a rapid fire technique right at point blank range. And it seems to be pretty effective, since Vegeta's been knocked out of his ultra ego form and is also unconscious. However, much to Vegeta's credit, we see that Granola has actually lost the power-up to his other eye. So it would seem that the power-up that he had earlier wasn't a permanent thing. It actually is more of a transformation, similar to Super Saiyan, where if he expends enough energy, he'll revert back to normal, or base form to refer to a Dragon Ball term. Anyways, after the fight concludes with Vegeta's defeat, Granola is too tired to stand, so he sits and props himself up against the wall. And it's there that he notices a mother and her child hiding from all the chaos, and this is what triggers the flashback that we get to see during this chapter. Now, this flashback in particular is fairly short. It's only a couple pages, but we do get the reveal of Granola's mother, and we get to learn that when the Saiyans started their rampage, some other Cerealians allowed him or helped him to escape and return to his mother. Now, I could be wrong here, but this does look like the building that he was in when he saw the Saiyan, or the transformed Saiyan, tear the roof off the building. And if you remember back to my very first Dragon Ball review on this channel, I mentioned that that great ape had the exact same facial scarring as Bardock. So even though this flashback was very short and cut pretty much right after the scene, we see that there's a rumbling sound going on and him and his mother looking off in fear. So I'm fairly certain that the following panels could be completed by going back and looking at those where we saw Bardock ripping off the roof of this chapel, or this building that it looks like. In any case, we're brought back to the present when Granola notices that the mother and child are as fearful of him as he and his mother were of the Saiyans. And it's then that he's interrupted by Vegeta, where Vegeta points out and notes that he's pretty much being a hypocrite. And then he even points out the fact that his race isn't as savage or as barbaric as he is. And even though it seems like Granola is starting to respond a little bit better to Vegeta's moral teachings throughout these past couple chapters, he immediately reverts back to his vengeful side and claims that he'll never forgive the Saiyans for what they did. And at that point, Granola then proceeds to blast Vegeta back outside of the bubble, so that way they can continue their fight and not endanger the city or its residents. And then, not willing to let go of his rage, we see that Granola is actually prepared to put all of his being into one attack to actually end Vegeta and himself as well. And at this point, we see that his second eye reactivates and he starts charging up a pretty cool looking technique. And we get a little more self-dialogue with Vegeta and him apologizing to Beerus and himself for not being able to become the cold, callous man that he used to be. But he resigns himself to death, and with Granola doing the same, Goku, of course, wants neither of them to die. And then before Granola's final attack can be released, we see that Minato, Oatmeal, and the ship are zooming past Goku somehow, and we see that Minato is looking out the window and seems to recognize Goku. Now, in a bit of plot convenience, we've seen how tough that the Saiyans and their bodies are, but Goku can't get near Granola as he's charging up this attack. But somehow Minato and the ship can fly right in there. And then when Granola notices the ship, Goku takes advantage of his distraction and flies in and disrupts his attack. Afterwards, Minato gets off the ship and then explains to Granola that there actually is one Saiyan that is not worthy of his vengeance. And if Minato recognizing Goku wasn't foreshadowing enough, it clearly is referring to Bardock, or Burdock. And upon that name being mentioned by Minato, Goku seems to be a bit curious, and Vegeta has a moment of realization. And then the chapter concludes with Granola's confusion about hearing from Minato that they were both saved by Saiyan. So, not to toot my own horn here, but just kind of to point out how in tune I am with the writing of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Super as a whole. I did predict in another video, which I believe was my third Dragon Ball chapter review, that Minato would likely be the one who stopped the fight, and also that Bardock was likely the great ape who tore off the roof of the place that Granola and his mother were hiding. And I'll have more to say about what this might mean in terms of flashbacks and in terms of future story, but first we'll get into the ratings portion of the video. Now, when it comes to the rating portion of my reviews, I typically rate the artwork, the story, and the hype. And then I use the average of those three ratings to come up with my overall rating for the chapter as a whole. And as always, I'm going to start with the artwork for this chapter. And for the artwork, I'm going to go ahead and give the rating a 7. And this is because we don't really see a whole lot of really dynamic or really unique panels. I do like the fact that the settings change a little bit here and there, but the chapter as a whole seemed to be peppered with a couple random panels that were a bit blurry. Now, when it comes to action panels, this is permitted a bit, but in this chapter in particular, it seemed to give in a bit more than usual. So I know my rating of 7 might seem a bit harsh for a Dragon Ball chapter, but I think if you go back and take a look at some of the panels and some of the pages, you might agree with me. Okay, now with the artwork out of the way, we can move on to the story, which in this week's chapter, I'm going to give it a 10. It's not any, narrative masterpiece or anything, but I do really appreciate the fact that we got a lot of depth in terms of the characters and how they're interacting with one another. In particular with Vegeta, it seems like he's had some changes in his mentality, but there's still growth to some extent. Now, he's no Sigmund Freud, but his ability to use philosophy to kind of appeal to his opponent, or at least maybe this opponent in particular who's so bent on revenge, he seems to be the more level-headed out of him and Goku, and even Granola in this situation. And I think that the way they set up Granola's flashback, the moment he noticed that mother and child cowering from him, that was beautifully timed and beautifully written. I think that was perfect setup for a flashback. Even though it was brief, it was very well placed. And then not to mention the fact that we get the Bardock name drop in a canon chapter of Dragon Ball. And we also get to see that we're probably going to get a flashback of Goku's father. And I'm very excited to see how they write that out when it's not in the context of a movie. So when it comes to the story, I'm definitely giving it a 10 for this week. I mean, we have great dialogue, smooth transitions into conversations, into flashbacks, into scenes. And then we get a setup for a narrative treat for all the Dragon Ball fans who've been waiting for Goku's father to become canon, or at least to see how Akira actually thinks this out in terms of his story and the kind of person he was. So again, it's an easy 10 in terms of story for me. Now moving on to this chapter's hype, I'm going to give that an 8. It's not super hype. We don't get an amazing fight or anything. It's mostly dialogue heavy with a few action pieces here and there. And hype doesn't necessarily have everything to do with action, because if it was strictly action based, I would have rated this chapter a good deal lower. But I'd have to say that most of the hype from this chapter actually comes from the dialogue and the emotional range that we get from Vegeta and Granola respectively in this chapter. Not to mention at the very end where we get the potential stories for Bardock, Minato, and Granola. So I'd say that an 8 in terms of hype is very reasonable and very fair for this month's chapter. Alright, so with all that being said, that brings this month's chapter rating to a total of 8.3. A great chapter, a lot to look forward to, and a lot to enjoy about this chapter as well. So not at all groundbreaking, but still something worthy of reading. And towards the end of my videos, I typically get into a little bit of discussion. There's not a whole lot to talk about in terms of what occurred, but we can speculate a little bit on what this potential information about Bardock, or even this potential flashback that we're getting, might have to do with Dragon Ball and its lack of narrative storytelling, really, when it comes to canon flashbacks. Now, I'll admit that when I first started reading this arc, I was kind of concerned about where this story could actually go. I kind of felt like the writers were putting themselves in a corner when it came to Granola not officially being a bad guy, but being stronger than Goku and Vegeta. Now, the Saiyans aren't typically known for their expositional skills, but at the end of the chapter, we see that Goku is confused to the name of Bardock, whereas Vegeta seems to have hit an accord with him. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, and it's possible that maybe it'd been retconned, or this could have just been a translation issue, but I feel like back in the first fight between Goku and Vegeta, when Vegeta used the technique that created the false moon using energy, I'm pretty sure he credited that technique with being invented by Goku's father. Now, aside from that, the only thing I could think of that would actually relate Vegeta to knowing a low-class Saiyan would be his connection to Raditz. And of course, if Vegeta knew who Raditz's father was, he would know who Goku's father was. But being Saiyans and not really caring about backstories or caring about drama, it may just be possible that Vegeta never had a reason to bring up Goku's father. Now, knowing Goku, he probably really wouldn't care too much about hearing about his dad unless we get this flashback or this reveal from Minato that Bardock was a caring Saiyan and that he actually, wasn't quite as barbaric as most Saiyans would have been. And I personally like this idea because it would take away from the whole Goku hit his head or else he would have been evil thing. And maybe it's possible that through his father and through his mother, he naturally may have inherited genes of, I guess more caring people, maybe not good people per se, but more caring people. So there's a lot that they can do there narratively when it comes to this backstory, and I'm hoping they take their time and flesh it out. I honestly wouldn't even mind if we get kind of a One Piece flashback where we spend quite a few chapters getting to know a character who's no longer alive in the Dragon Ball universe. And the potential story aside, I'm also interested to see, or rather learn, exactly how Vegeta's new form operates. He says it's unbounded, but he keeps getting KO'd and knocked out of his form. We also see that it requires him to be unfeeling and uncaring, which he doesn't really seem to be, but it may just be possible that he may have kind of sympathized and understood what Granola was going through. So I hope they flesh it out a little bit more, or at least give it that form a little more depth, so that way it isn't just, whenever I don't have anything to lose or anything to risk or anyone I care about, then you can see me go all out. I really hope they didn't just give us that, because that would just essentially make the form a new cool looking design but without much utility, quite like Ultra Instinct does. And a final point of discussion, I'm also curious as to why Minato did not mention that Bardock saved them from destruction. It seems like something you can't really gloss over. I could understand if maybe Bardock didn't want the other Saiyans to know that he was kind-hearted or that he was saving people from a race who was supposed to be wiped out. But it doesn't explain why he wouldn't tell Granola that, who blatantly has let it be known that he does not like Saiyans, or he hates all Saiyans. So I think it'll be interesting to see the writers write themselves out of that corner that they put themselves in by Minato keeping his pipe shut about there being a good Saiyan amongst the Saiyans. Well, that is all I have for this review and ratings. Please comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on the review or on the chapter as a whole. Also, like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content and want to see more like it. I'm John, and I'm from Adam's Fam Anime. Thank you guys very much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next video.